Let me talk a little bit about the formulas that we used for that one piece of the pie, which was the colleges and revenue generating units. Undergraduate and graduate tuition was pushed out. We did that based upon a 75-25 split. 75% for undergraduate and graduate tuition would go out based upon where the faculty member is and where that course is being taught. And it was based on earned credit hours, so the student had to receive a grade. 75% was allocated on that method. 25% is to be allocated based upon where the student is, where that student is majoring, what program that student is tied to. In terms of the undergraduate piece, the 75% is a mixed pool. It's residency blind. Although all tuition is going out, we didn't allocate a dollar for dollar. Basically, it just elevated the entire pool, and so the pool was just more distributed based upon those earned credit hours. However, on the graduate side, we knew that our graduate programs needed to pull from those out-of-state students in order to keep quality up. We didn't want to disincentivize our colleges from going after those students, so we allowed residency to follow on the 75-25 rule for our graduates. For those programs that were considered professional in nature, so medicine, dentistry, pharmacy as examples, all of that goes 100% to the unit where it was generated. Okay, so those programs all have differential tuition. We knew that differential tuition was created because it was market-based, and they had special instructional needs within those units, and it was important to recognize that the revenue needed to flow directly. Our state appropriations are level to declining, as I've already talked about. We've now reached the apex in Kentucky where tuition is now more than state appropriations. So we divided our state appropriations into two pots. One was mandated programs. We have several pieces of our budget. It's about $90 million, of which cooperative extension represents about $80 million of it, the cooperative extension and research arm. Those mandated state appropriations are direct allocations to the colleges where those programs exist. We wanted to make sure that we proved to the state and showed to the colleges that we invested in those programs dollar for dollar. The other piece were the net piece, and that was the net state appropriations. The net state appropriations are allocated to incentivize the retention and graduation of our Kentucky residents. The state of Kentucky is considering performance-based funding, and so the University of Kentucky wanted to make sure that we were recognizing that possible trend, although we don't know it's actually going that direction, but we wanted to make sure as the flagship institution that we were recognizing the retention of those Kentucky students and the graduation of those students. We also wanted to recognize that the research that we do at the University of Kentucky impacts the lives of Kentuckians. So it is also allocated on that methodology as well. F&A, we wanted to send out 100%. If the college is going to get a grant and they're generating it, we want those colleges to be able to invest in the programs by which they can generate more research. We want to grow our research engine. Allocated expenses, though. So we sent all the money out. So where does the money come from the support and resource centers? Well, that comes through an allocated expense methodology. So we divided our support and resource center units into 5 major buckets. Academic, which includes our enrollment management, student affairs, office of the provost. Those are examples of that. That bucket is allocated back to those revenue generating units where the tuition and state appropriations went, and is allocated to them based upon earned credit hours. We wanted to make sure that the way that we were distributing the tuition revenue was the way that we were allocating that particular bucket of expense. On administration, which includes the president, human resources, the EVPFA, the controllers division, and others, are allocated based upon total FTEs. So those total FTEs are students, faculty, and staff. Campus services, which includes libraries, information technology, and the police, are allocated also on that same metric of FTE. Facilities, which includes our debt service on particular projects, and our physical plant, are allocated based upon a college's relative share of assigned gross square feet. And research, which is the piece that we use to support the research efforts, so our sponsor projects administration and our sponsored projects pieces like IRB, would be funded by a college's percentage of direct research expenditures. So again, we're mapping the actual allocations of the revenue to the expense. Since we send all the money out, we have to be able to pull some resources back to be used for institutional purposes. And so we have something called a Strategic Initiatives Fund. The Strategic Initiatives Fund in year one is intended to provide a subsidy for colleges that through resources may not be able to support themselves entirely. So they are segmented. We value all our colleges. We want them to be able to respond to the incentives in the model, so therefore we're creating them at a zero base, meaning that their revenues meet their expenses. So there are self-supporting areas that I talked about related to University of Kentucky healthcare and our athletics department as examples. It also includes housing and dining. Those pieces are truly tubs on their own bottom. Those tubs on their own bottom, however, utilize university resources. So we bill those through a service assessment. That revenue that gets received from those service assessments is actually pushed back out to the colleges. So again, revenue that comes in, we're pushing it back out. So we're using 13-14 as our feedback loop. Okay, so we've rolled out 11-12 data. We're conducting a significant number of sessions with deans, with faculty, with staff, with colleges, with anyone who wants to listen about what this model is all about. And so we're using 13-14 as a feedback loop. We have 11 working groups, we call them work streams in process, to help us evaluate the model formulas and to see if there are issues we have yet to resolve. In 14-15, we're actually in our planning mode right now. We will be in our incremental model, but we will use the model as a means by which to inform our decisions in 14-15. And we are planning to go live July 1st, 2015 with our new model. Our provost has been very clear, though, as our president has been clear. The institution needs to be ready. So we will evaluate where we are to see whether or not we're ready to roll. Our provost has made sure that we are very engaged at a college level. She wants to make sure that there is engaged, open communication. So that part of it is really important. She utilizes the Dean's Council as the means to talk about issues that come up with the model and make decisions. At Kentucky, we've learned a few lessons, and so I wanted to share those just very quickly. Communication, communication, communication. If you think you've done it enough, you haven't. Do it some more. What we found is that you've got to make sure that folks understand where you've been so they know where you're going. If they don't know where you've been, they have no idea what you're talking about, where you're going. So it's really important to be able to lay all that out. We've learned to be incredibly engaged, to listen intently and be incredibly responsive. We know it gets ugly before it gets better, and that's okay. Taking the veil off 150 years of incremental budgeting might be a little painful, but it's worth it.
Thank you. I'm Dennis Irwin. I'm Dean of the Russ College of Engineering and Technology at Ohio University. I've been doing that for 12 years now, I think, or almost 12 years. It seems like longer. Tell you a little bit about Ohio University. We are not Ohio State University. We don't have a really good football team. I've got to fly through Columbus, Andrew. I think I'll say that to them. To give you an idea of the size of the magnitude of the problem, as my profs used to say, our Athens campus that's our main campus, has 23,000 students on that campus. We probably enroll, and it fluctuates a lot because it has to do with regional campus enrollments, which tend to be two-year programs. At any given time, we might have as many as 38,000 students enrolled in our Athens campus and on our 5 regional campuses. Probably here, what the most important number is the fact that our budget is about $500 million, so it's significantly less than the University of Kentucky, probably significantly less than any of the other panelist institutions, and also of Auburn, but still significant piece. Now, at Auburn, you've got a large engineering school, and other colleges, I think, are smaller here than engineering. At Ohio University, we have a small engineering college compared to other colleges, and in particular, our 900-pound gorilla, Arts and Sciences, which has 10,000 students and 340 faculty, or 400, something like that. So that'll give you an idea that there are differences here. So this modeling approach can really work no matter what that mix is. To tell you a little bit about our model, it really is rooted in what the state of Ohio has done with its subsidy model for a long time. So public institutions in the state of Ohio are funded based on formula. And the model is changing a little bit, and it fluctuates from year to year a tiny bit. But fundamentally, there are disciplinary differences in how the state of Ohio funds higher education, as well as level of instruction differences. So if you go back to thinking about the University of Florida matrix of 80 things, which sounds really terrible to Matt down there, the fact is I think ours is probably about 3 times that large. So we have a lot of different categories. They're very similar to the ones that Matt talked about. It's called our taxonomy. Nobody fully understands it. I'm sorry, nobody does. There are people in Columbus who claim they do. Fundamentally, though, there is a recognition that costs are different for different disciplines, and in fact, the weightings are based on statewide historical costs of instruction for various disciplines at various levels. That means, though, that we didn't have to do the work that Matt had to do in coming up with this big matrix. It was already there, and it's not our local cost histories, it's statewide, which can be a problem for a high-cost institution like ours. We are about the second highest cost institution, roughly speaking, in the state of Ohio. We think we do a good job efficiently with the dollars that we get. However, we do believe that we do a better job than at least 6 of our public peers in the state of Ohio. So they have instructional models that are cheaper than ours. And so we pay the price for that when it comes to state funding. Okay. Now, moving on to tuition. How do we attribute tuition income to a particular college? As I said, the state essentially does it for you as far as the subsidy piece goes. For the tuition piece, the university strategically chose in a meeting of the deans to weight tuition as well. And tuition is one of those things we cannot charge differential tuition in the state of Ohio. It is flat for everybody. English major pays the same amount as a history major as an engineering major. So, but because we knew that these weightings were based on actual cost histories, we thought it made sense to go ahead and weight the tuition attribution the same way, and so we do that. Now, Matt has these weightings, but he doesn't have subvention. The other two have subvention, but not weightings. We have both. So at the end of the year, the provost taxes everyone. Actually, it happens at the beginning of the year, but we won't worry about that. In our case, a rate of 12.5%. Now, the reason that it was set at 12.5% is basically to put us all in the negative region. In other words, every college looks like it is a loser. That means every college dean has to go to the provost and ask. At least that is in principle what happens. In reality, we almost certainly, although it's not officially written down anywhere, we are almost certainly going to use this model, which we call responsibility center modeling, on a marginal basis. In other words, what we have this fiscal year is probably going to stay there plus or minus something. Now, you may think, well, that sounds like the old historical budgeting model. There's an important difference, though. I can now figure out how to move it plus or minus. Whereas before, I had no way of knowing. Do I have to give the provost kid a ride to school, in the afternoon? Provost kid at one time was a friend of my son. So. Anyway. Well, no, not now. I can tell what an increase in enrollment in a particular program is going to do to the bottom line. Okay, so I can go out and I can add efforts for recruiting in that particular program, and then I can get a little bit of an uptick. Now, if I should decide that I want to have a negative margin, then I could probably do that too. And I have done that in the past unknowingly. So I'll give you an example of why you want to do these kinds of models, where there is a lot more transparency. And this is a real world example. I had just become dean, and I probably knew too much about our department, our School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. I was faced with a $250,000 budget cut, didn't want to lay anybody off particularly, and couldn't do anything with tenure track faculty members. That's a state law as far as I can tell. I've certainly never been able to do anything. But there was a service course that we taught with what I'll call very casual faculty members, people that we really had to cajole to come in and teach this course. So it was computer science, computer literacy or something like that. Completely off base in terms of the mission of our college, okay? But it was popular. There were a lot of people at that time who needed this kind of instruction, but not in our college. So this was sort of doing people a favor kind of thing, but it cost me $250,000 a year magically to support this course. So I decided to eliminate it. Well, that was great for me. It met my budget cut. So that was a plus for me in some sense, right? But what happened to the university? What happened to the overall revenue of the university? We lost those weighted student credit hours that were coming from that course. They couldn't report them to the state anymore. But why did I care? I couldn't see where the revenue was coming from. And they certainly weren't giving it to me. So I think this really illustrates the point that for the university, I made the wrong decision. The university didn't have any transparency either, so they couldn't figure it out either. Now, if I had known, if I had been given the revenue that was generated by that course, and there were a lot of enrollments in this course, a lot, much more than any other course I've ever had, then I would not have made that choice. I would have found that $250,000 someplace else. So I know you want to ask some questions, so I think I'm gonna wrap my comments up there.
I'm Bill Sauser. I'm a management professor, and I'm the immediate past chair of the University Senate. So I'm here naturally to represent the faculty, who are certainly capable of speaking for themselves. But I do have a question for you. Does Huron and the steering committee, have you at this point actually generated a straw man model at this point?
Yes, we have a model that actually works as what we call a baseline model, so we can test different incentives, different structures, different elements. So for example, the steering committee has talked about different incentives for research, different incentives for instruction, different incentives for colleges that recruit students. And so we have a model that we can plug in different algorithms to.
I had that impression, and I'm wondering at this point, who has seen that model, or who's had a chance to play around with it, comment about it, and so forth? Who's seen it at this point?
So we have shared hard copies with the model with the steering committee, the deans, and we had meetings with each of the deans where we asked them to bring their department chairs as well. And so we had department chair meetings in each of the colleges with hard copies of the model. We haven't distributed the electronic version to anyone.
Right. So you're starting very reasonably, in my opinion, with people who would be generating it. Eventually, will faculty members have the opportunity to look at the models, to comment on them, to poke holes in them if they want, make suggestions?
So the model is not a model such that it's easy to allocate. It's easy to send out an email and then you can just easily open it up, decide to put numbers here and there. It takes a lot of training coordination. We're working with about half dozen people at the university to train them on how to use the model. But certainly we're sharing iterations and would like feedback. Just not the electronic version we've not done before.
Sure. We heard about the possibility of different alternative models. Have we looked at the possibility of having alternative models that can be tested against one another. I know we're talking about running parallel for a year, but are we looking at different models, or do we just have the one?
So the way the modeling typically works is, and I guess I've helped about a dozen or 15 institutions think through this process, and what Huron recommends and what we've been discussing here is we essentially take the model and develop an aggressive market-based model. Literature would call it an ETOB model, so every tub on its own bottom, okay? And then what we essentially do, so that would be considered the most decentralized model that you generally see in higher ed. About 60% of universities use incremental modeling, which is the most centralized model. So we start with that aggressive model, and then we put assumptions into the model to kind of back away from the ledge and figure out where's the comfort level where it may work with the strategic plans in the university, the incentives that we've heard people want, the culture that we want to keep, may perhaps disrupt some, but not disrupt too much, those types of things. So when we talk about different models, it's really points on that spectrum, all built within one model. Is that fair?
That does help to understand, and of course, as we see it, we'll understand more. Dr. Roberts?
I just want to make sure I understand, though,
Yep.
the hard copies, that is the only bit we've seen, at least some of us. The hard copies that you've shared with us are only on that far end of the spectrum, correct?
That's not correct. I would consider them several steps back. So it's kind of a market-based, every tub on its own bottom model, kind of a traditional RCM model, a model that has a subvention fund that controls dollars centrally so that colleges don't have to worry about whether they turn a profit or have a loss. And so we've been sharing a model that's much more closer to perhaps a performance-based model or a contemporary model than an RCM model or an ETOB model.
Thank you for the panel for coming. It sounds like everything's just hunky-dory. Probably universities that I've been familiar with are pretty complex, and probably there have been some people who have had differing opinions, or there have been some problems. So could you sort of turn the page, other side of the leaf, and tell us where the moss is growing, or where the problems have been that we need to look at? Because I think we've only really gotten one side of that question.
Well, I'll start. I'd say interdisciplinary is an issue because money's allocated to a college on student credit hours, and the systems just don't exist to keep track of necessarily where all interdisciplinary activities are going on. At our university, we talk about it a lot, and what's happened is the deans have decided they do not want to have a automated system that can track all that and trade money back and forth for teaching. They get together with each other and they trade money with each other is how they deal with it. Now, a lot of chairs and a lot of faculty may not understand that, and they don't want to, so they're not engaging in discussions with others about doing interdisciplinary activities. So that's been we've seen less initiatives toward interdisciplinary activity, and it's something I'm working hard on trying to overcome those things. A number of people, almost everybody will claim that even though we go through the sophisticated weighting model, and we did also compare our weighting model to a number of other states, including Ohio and Texas, and but still claim that it was underweighted from the very beginning, and therefore all we did was put in cement those weightings, and if they're underweighted. And also they believe it's too rigid, and it just doesn't, if things that change in a college, it won't affect, it doesn't quickly, it's not dynamic enough to have those changes. Now, it is dynamic in the sense of enrollment, but if just the state of the art of whatever that college teaches, it doesn't necessarily keep up with those areas.
We are actually halfway through our first year with a hold harmless proviso. But the dark underbelly is that the administrative support units don't get it yet, right? They don't understand that we know exactly how much they cost each one of us, and that we're looking at it and we're saying we're not getting our money's worth. I'll give you an example. Even if the people in Athens, Ohio find out about this, they've heard it before, right? So I pay $500,000 a year, according to our budget model, for our custodial services in a building that is about 190,000 square feet. That doesn't make any sense. We're not getting that level of service, not anywhere close. We're going to have some tough conversations over the next few years. They don't want to have them, but we're going to. But the caution is that you will expose these things, and there'll be some answers that people don't want to see or hear. Now, on the other hand, finance and administration is something that people come to me and they say, I can't believe we're paying so much money for finance and administration. Well, then I go through this thought experiment, and it goes like this. Okay, finance and administration costs me about $700,000 a year. Well, if I didn't have finance and administration, what would I have to pay to reproduce that service? Well, I'd have to hire an internal auditor. I'd have to have, a number of accounts payable, accounts receivable, compliance people, all this stuff. Pretty soon, you've spent up $750,000, $800,000. So the nice thing about this, to me, is overwhelmingly the transparency. And those people will eventually understand that they have to provide the level of service that you're paying for. Not happening yet for me.
Like I was telling you before, before we put the model in place, we were going through a trend of enrollment decline. Since we put the model in place, our enrollment's grown, our undergraduate enrollment in particular has grown by 32%. We went from a total enrollment number of about 28,000 back in 2007. We're over 33,000 now. Majority of that growth has come from non-resident students. So we know that the incentives that we did put in place, people were grabbing onto, and they're actually running with it. So that is a win. As far as kind of some of the stuff that I think we could probably look at, right now the way our model works is that the amount of money that we get from the state, and it's attributed to the colleges, is not formulaic. So that's considered, in some deans' perspective, as a black box still. They don't really have, we have KPIs, we have benchmarks that we use to help decision makers make decisions on how that money's attributed, but it's not real transparent from the dean's perspective. Most likely that's something that's going to be addressed. I think that the current provost that we have right now is doing a better job of saying we're going to make this more kind of strategic. For the most part, this state appropriation adjustments that are made between the colleges are really kind of dealing with the differences in the revenue portfolio of each one of the units and the cost structures of those units, and he's using to help that to stabilize the differences in those units. So I'd say that's one thing. The other one is, again, back to the transparency, the engagement piece, having people feel like they're involved so that there's a trust out there about the decisions that are being made. Having that mechanism in place, I think, is crucial. In our case, we're not there yet. It's something that we looked at the review. We tried to make adjustments, but we'll just have to see whether or not those adjustments helped out.
On October 2013, when we rolled out the numbers, it was fun. It's been a hard pill to swallow. When you roll out these numbers and you show a subvention, there's a feeling that you're creating a beholdenness to administration. That wasn't the way administration was looking at it. Administration was thinking about it more as an investment in the college, and that's not how it was rolled in. That's not how it was perceived. So one of the things that we've learned through this process, we haven't implemented yet. We're simply just in the process of trying to roll numbers out. And what we've learned is that perception is huge. How numbers look are incredibly important. And so we're looking at different ways to look at information such that we truly are showing it as a commitment and as an institutional commitment and not just a give back, something that colleges can feel that there is some permanence, some stability to their numbers. The other thing that I will say that has been kind of hard to depict is that at UK we've never really, we've used data, but we've never used it to the level that we're using it now. And something that we've discovered that's been really hard for us to deal with is that we got a lot of data cleanup to do. And, you know, the data that's in the system doesn't necessarily really match because it's never been used that way before. And so we got a lot of work to do. And, you know, and what's good about it is that, you know, at least we're engaged in conversation. We're talking about things we've never talked about before. And even though they might be hard conversations, I'd rather have them because at least you're being open and you're being honest.
You know, all of our graduate and undergraduate program are the top 10 in the nation, so, you know, we're proud of the quality of the program. At the same time, we're considered as expensive programs. You know, for example, within our graphic design program, we only have one lecture, all the others are studios. And they were limited in terms of how many students in those studios, 12 to 15 students. And even though we charge them professional fee, you know, actually for our undergraduate students, they pay 7 semesters of $2,160 as professional fee, but as the result, over 90% of that goes to the salary and benefits for the faculty and the staff. So basically, really, they're getting charged more, but getting less and less every year. And then we're just concerned about this new model. We're just not sure whether any of the panelists university recognize the difference between studios and lectures, and then how do you maintain the quality, not just only looking at the cost. Thank you.
I have an aviation program, and airplanes are even more expensive than studios. And I don't mean to be flip about this, but I think I can assure you of something, and that is the issue goes back to rebalancing. When you run any model like this, you have some people who are negative by, say, $2 million, some colleges. Some other colleges are negative by $12 million. If university leadership makes the mistake of saying that one is too expensive, then nobody can help you, right? But that's already going on. I mean, all that's happening is that the numbers are being calculated. Now, you can argue about whether they're being calculated correctly or not, but once all those mistakes have been, you know, worried out, then ultimately it's there. So then the university has a decision to make. Now, I don't know here who is going to make that decision. I would assume that it would be the provost and others on the leadership team. That's the way it works at Ohio University. But that negative number has to be dealt with. So do you forgive all of it? In other words, do you continue to give as much money to that college as you have in the past? Do you immediately say you've got $12 million less than you had last year? I doubt that would happen. In fact, I think that would lead to a lot of disasters for a lot of colleges everywhere, not just at Auburn University. What in reality happens is that for a few years at least, yeah, you're giving back all the money that, you know, it looks like you were in the red for, right? So you've been subsidized by $12 million. You're going to be subsidized by $12 million the next year. But then the question is, what about the year after that? What these budget models are intended to do is to give you information that will incentivize you to engage in behavior that will get you to that level that you are now today. All's okay, right? Plus, say, 0.5%, and then the next year plus 1%, that kind of thing. And the guarantee there is that you will be able to keep that, okay? Whereas now, if you did that same kind of thing and you were a great behavior, you engaged in great behavior from the university point of view, and you brought in more money for the university, you wouldn't get a dime of it necessarily, okay? So that, to me, is really the big difference here. Now, at some point, the leadership of the university is going to have to make some people comfortable about what's going to happen going forward, right? Are we really going to cut people's budgets by $1 million? Are we really going to take $5 million from one college and give it to another college? It seems unlikely to me. I'm not the person to answer the question.
Yeah, I guess in Florida's model, the weighting takes in the cost of delivery, so we'd pick up some of that. if there are fees, whether they're material supply fees, studio fees, or whatever, those do go directly to the college. So if you were paying $2,100 extra, that would go to the college to support that activity.
Another question?
I'm James Goldstein. I'm with the English department. Probably my biggest worry about all of this, and I don't know if there are any answers, but the conditions that have changed for higher education over the last few decades, but really snowballed with the downturn and so on. The reason so many schools are changing this budgeting model to more responsibility and incentivization is you know, a lot of it has to do with the loss of public revenues and so on, and that money's never coming back. So, but there's been a parallel history that's been taking place that, from a faculty point of view, worries me. That, I mean, we've all read the statistics that from 1980 roughly till now, there's been an inversion in the ratio between tenure-track faculty and non-tenurable contingent faculty. Auburn University is better than many large universities in terms of the percentage of student credit hours that gets taught by tenurable faculty compared to contingent faculty. But what my biggest worry would be is whether shifting to this kind of model, not just at Auburn, but more and more other schools, is this going to speed up that distortion, or is it going to tend to put brakes on that distortion? And I'm not saying anybody has a crystal ball who knows the future, but I'm wondering from your own local experiences, were people looking at possible unintended consequences? Or if you're incentivizing, get more students in the seat, get more research pushed out by the faculty, isn't that almost certainly going to lead to having more non-tenurable contingent faculty to fill the breach there? So is it something that your campuses have looked at in terms of what are going to be the consequences for the future of academic freedom and its connection with people that have a little bit more job security than, you know, annual contract people and so on? Because at a certain point, it's going to be really hard to convince our best and our brightest young people that getting a PhD is really a rational thing to do. I mean, it's already perhaps in the crisis point. But I'm just wondering, has that other parallel history been analyzed and thought about in relation to the purely budgetary stuff?
This is really, at Ohio University, this is a governance piece, and so we have several new committees that have been put together. One of them is tasked with, I think it's 4 or 5 different items. I'm trying to look for it here. One of them is the percentage of our student credit hours that are attributable to tenure track faculty members. And so that committee, which meets on a regular basis, much more than yearly, I don't remember exactly what the schedule is tasked with watching that number to make sure that that is not one of the unintended consequences. But short answer to your question is, yes, we've recognized it, and that may be one of the unintended consequences. The way we're going to watch that is by having a faculty committee watch it.
Yeah, and I would say Florida's not much different than that. I can see the fear or the worry that just looking at the financial data would drive you that way, but a university is much more than just financial. It doesn't distribute profits, it doesn't pay bonuses based on profitability, and it's really about quality. And so our provost and our faculty senate review adjunct to tenure track faculty ratios very, very closely.
I would echo my colleagues. In terms of Kentucky, that what you just expressed is exactly what faculty have expressed at Kentucky as well. And our provost is incredibly aware of that and understands that concern. And so one of our 11 working groups that we have in place is a faculty committee that are helping us to understand that particular issue at a greater detail level. Because just as Matt said, our university is more than just dollars and cents. It's about the quality programs and the excellent students that we create, and that's from our quality faculty, and we embrace that. So we understand that, and we're trying to negate that.
The only thing I'll add is, program quality, and quite frankly, program rankings pretty much trump any of the financial decisions that are being made. So, just like everybody else says, this has been an issue, at least for our university, for a number of years. And just like they were saying, we have faculty committees that are reviewing that and continually reminding administration of that issue. So it's in the forefront of the priorities of our university.
I'm Michael Watkins. I'm the chair of the philosophy department. I have a related worry. I guess I would like to hear more from you guys about how the model incentivizes quality and not just quantity. I mean, if my department is being given money, for instance, based on, at least in part, on the number of students we're teaching, there certainly is an incentive to make those classes larger and larger. You know, increase the amount of money we have for travel, for research leave, and you know, we can teach those classes, you know, larger and larger capacity. You just can't do the same kinds of things in those classes. And so I mean, I'm sure you guys have worried about that. So how have you responded to it? How can the model respond to it?
I agree. It could lead to that of teaching larger and larger classes. You know what we really want, now that we have the transparency, we want a dialogue amongst the faculty and the chair and the dean about how they achieve their goals and their priorities, because you can't achieve everything. Is it quality? Is it access? Is it research? And just for an example, our business school, when they went into this model, they decided what they really wanted to be good at was upper level undergraduate and graduate level courses, and they had to get those classes small. And so they decided to go teach very large first and second year classes and grow them, take that savings they had out of that and reinvest it in having very small classes with their upper level and graduate level courses with eminent scholars. And they've changed their whole model toward that direction. They've probably changed more than anybody because of the model. I think others continue to just keep looking at, you know, what is that balance of quality versus the cost, because we're not, as long as the state budget's saved, the central administration isn't taking money away from you. You've got a fixed pot of money, and you get to decide where you want to put it. So if you put it all into big, huge if you cut costs by putting in big, huge classes, what are you going to do with that savings? You're going to invest it somewhere at the college. At least that's in Florida. It stays with that college. So you get to decide what you want to do with it. And so if you have a higher priority than small classes, that's how you decide. If small classes and the quality of instruction is what's really important to you, you can decide to do that. It's just for us, it's just balancing those priorities.
Does Auburn have a culture where academic administrators sort of use student credit hours taught as a badge of honor or something like that? I mean, I know at Ohio University, we've always pushed people, to raise the number of, in our case, weighted student credit hours as high as we could. You know, you're a really good manager if your faculty are teaching a lot of weighted student credit hours. Is that something that, is that true? Well, I mean, so what do you do now, right? What do you do in the existing system to worry about these things, to make sure that they don't happen? It's the same sort of thing. You can think of weighted student credit hours in dollars. So, in our case, we have a university curriculum council that would slap us down, in a minute. They monitor those statistics, and they'd have a conversation. They would pass a resolution, and they are part of Faculty Senate, so there'd be a resolution passed, and we would have to pay attention to it. So, okay. Yeah,
I'll just make a quick comment for Iowa State. We have seen significant growth, and one of the priorities of the president, our president came on board in January of 2012, so he's been here about almost 2 years. One of the first things that he recognized with the growth that we had going on, and most likely we can attribute to the incentives that we have put in place, is the fact of the student having a strong student experience. So he actually put together a council called the Student Experience Enhancement Council that looks at the issues that you're talking about, making sure that students have good experience, that the education that they are getting is what they expected when they came to the institution, that the student life outside the classroom is again, what they were expecting, making sure that we have a good community university gown relationships, just the whole gamut kind of a thing. Just so from Iowa State's perspective, we recognize the fact that this growth that's been going on is going to impact both the students and the faculty and staff, and that we're putting in place some a mechanism for gathering input so that we can set the priorities for the university to address those. I mean, it's kind of generic, but we just put that in place last fall.
Similar to Iowa State, we have a student success initiative that's underway at the University of Kentucky, which includes us looking at our retention and graduation rates and the success of our students inside and outside the classroom. And so that effort is also being built into reporting methodologies that is our intent to provide to the deans as part of the financial model rollout, because it's important for folks to know where they are in terms of those numbers to be able to understand where to respond. So we're trying to include those quality measures in terms of the data that we roll out.
Another question?
Bill Daniels, Fisheries, College of Ag. I have 2 questions and 1 comment. First comment is in the area of transparency. If you want faculty to buy into this model, at some point we need to see it. My first question is there a weighted student credit has been talked about in the model for Auburn? If so, can you share that with the faculty? You can just say yes or no for that.
So, no, the current version of the model does not have a weighting in there, but like we talked about, there are kind of toggles. You can toggle yes or no and look at different options, different weightings, things like that.
Okay, in that case, I probably won't buy into it. My question to the panel, in regards to graduate students, do you have tuition waivers for your graduate students? And if so, how does that fit within the modeling here?
Yeah, at the University of Florida, we have some money that we take off the top of appropriations that goes to our graduate, Dean of Graduate Studies, and they can allocate those monies. And then primarily those go to stipends for graduate students to incentivize PhD production. And then colleges, the state gives us money for waivers also, and we put that in the pot that we allocate to the schools. And so a college can give as much waivers as many waivers, as high a stipend. Now, there's some control on stipends, but they can pay stipends and scholarships, but they have to pay for it themselves. It comes out of their budget. So we've basically allocated that all out as part of the revenues, and they can give whatever they want, in whether you call it discount scholarship stipends in that way.
At the University of Kentucky, we treat our core scholarships for both graduate and undergraduate students as a common good. And so therefore, it's part of the allocated expense methodology that distributes under the academic services bucket, so it distributes based upon earned credit hour. We are, though, however, going under a very serious review of our graduate scholarships to determine whether or not we need to do a one-to-one relationship between the tuition and the graduate scholarship so that the waivers meet where the revenue is flowing rather than treating it as a common good. So we currently have a committee together that's reviewing that.
We're in an interesting situation right now where, now it's similar to University of Florida at Ohio University, where I'm authorized to give as many fee waivers, or they're actually tuition waivers, to our graduate students as I want, as long as I'm willing to pay for them, right? So, and that's okay with me, and I'll tell you why, because we're in a really, really interesting coincidental situation where the amount of subsidy that I get for a full one FTE graduate student is exactly a match within $50 or something like that to the amount of cost that I have in giving that tuition waiver to the graduate student. So that's what we do. So we waive primarily for our graduate students, in my college at least, that's our decision. Primarily, we waive tuition for graduate students if we pay them a stipend. So if they get a stipend, they don't have to pay tuition.
At Iowa State, since 100% of the tuition goes to the college where that graduate program, or that student is enrolled in the graduate program, they're responsible for the 100% of the scholarship. We're not allowed, state law, to provide waivers. They have to come as scholarships. So if that student is on a citizenship, that scholarship comes to wherever the tuition dollars go.
We heard comments from several of the panelists about the value of weighting distribution based on cost of instructional delivery, and we know that there are dramatic differences. And I'm wondering, why is that not part of the model under consideration, or are we too early to have reached that point yet?
So there's pros and cons to having a weighting, and two of the panelists have a weighting, and two of the panelists do not have a weighting, and that's generally what you see when you look across the industry. It's about 50-50. Typically, when you have a weighting, it enhances the financial importance of the model, because what you do is you weight the value of a credit hour, and then that weighting is supposed to take into account the differential cost of instruction, and so therefore a college's revenue minus its cost should be zero, right? Because the cost differential is taken into account by the weighting, right? Without a weighting, what you do is you say there's no implication or suggestion that you have a break-even or profit bottom line. We simply want to know what we're spending. And so you either have a weighting that's in the model, or you see, for example, a negative bottom line, and you acknowledge that that's the amount that you're recognizing, or that you're spending on the higher cost delivery. And so the challenge with the weighting is you spend a lot of time debating whether or not the weight's appropriate, right? You can ask the panelists. Usually at institutions where there is a weighting, it's impossible to find usually more than one person that can describe you the weighting, right? And if you think it's hard to get consensus for changing a budget model, it's really hard to get consensus for a weighting, right? And so not using a weighting and saying, look, we're not trying to get a zero bottom line, and just recognizing, okay, that fisheries or design or one of these programs costs more, and seeing that as a negative bottom line and saying that's okay. That we've decided is a better option for Auburn at this point, right? All these things are still up for debate and we're discussing them, but the model we shared with the deans and the department chairs took that approach.
The concern that I have with that is the idea of deans having to go hat in hand asking for revenue to fund these more expensive programs. And of course, I think you've made a good argument both ways. I just want to make that
So
make that comment.
can the panelists weigh in on deans going hat in hand? 'Cause I think that's something that a lot of people are nervous about.
The fact of the matter is, at Ohio University, everybody has to go hat in hand. That's the way it's set up. Even with the weights, you know, we have to go hat in hand. So in convincing my provost that she should subvene my entire negative number, right? In other words, give me everything, you know, that I had last year and maybe even some in addition, I posed this question to her. I said, do a thought experiment. And I said, think about what the university outside the College of Engineering would look like if you eliminated the College of Engineering, right? So let's go to this extreme and see what effects the College of Engineering actually has in a larger sense at the university. And so I said, just think of one thing and then you'll think of some more. And the one thing that I told her to think about was, how big would the Department of Mathematics be if the College of Engineering was not at Ohio University? Now, things are a little different here, but at our university it would be about 1/3 the size it is now. And so that really got her to think about the fact that we're all interrelated. We're all tied together. So she can't penalize me without penalizing somebody else.
Yeah, and even though we did, first year, we balanced, our weightings caused everybody to have a zero bottom line and no negatives, no subvention. But we do have a strategic fund. And so every dean goes to the provost and says, my weighting isn't high enough, invest permanently some portion of your strategic fund to effectively increase my weighting. So you do get that impact. And the reason we're thinking about going away from it is it's so complex. If you're thinking about adding a program or changing a program, adding more students to a program, you have to sit there and try to figure out, oh yeah, what's my weighting multiplied by the standard base number times the number of credit hours, and then I got a tax rate applied. So it's, any budget model for complex entities such as universities is very difficult, and the weighting just adds a much higher level of complexity and makes, and sometimes some of our, I don't want to name any names, but some of our deans, it kind of paralyzes them. They don't know how to do it, so they just don't do anything.
The deans at this university are really bright and really capable. Some are in the room, and I can guarantee they can make the arguments. I just wonder if that's the best way.
The amount of money, if we're talking hat in hand, is our state appropriated dollars. Again, that's the only dollars that the provost has in his hand to be able to determine how much each one of the deans are going to be. And it really comes down to the case that the deans can make about what they're proposing supports the university priorities. We've gone through a pretty elaborate process of designing a process for the president early on in the process to say these are what the university priorities are. If you come to the table with a plan and help support those priorities, I'll make sure you get the money to do it.
The question I had is how do your budget models incentivize research, and how is the straw man model we're looking at, how does it incentivize research?
Well, we're looking at possibly taking a small part of appropriations and and allocating based on growth in colleges research. Our other thing is we do not allocate our general and administrative and IT tax against direct research expenditures. So the only tax they pay is for our sponsored programs, for our division of sponsored research and for our contract and grant accounting office. They don't pay for payroll and HR and the president and the provost. They don't pay for those. So that's one way we incentivize it. And like Iowa, we also allocate almost all of the IDC back down to the departments, the PIs, and the colleges.
Currently at Kentucky, F&A is kept at the top, okay, and so the colleges receive about 15% of the total F&A that is brought into the institution. Kentucky has set its model, which has yet to roll out, but in terms of actual live, that we've set it so 100% of the F&A goes out, which will be a big difference from what they've seen before. Now, there's allocated expense that comes out of that, but it will still be more than what they've gotten in the past. So we're hopeful that that will be an incentivization for our colleges.
Under the old system, the college, the centers and institutes within the college, the departments and the individual PIs got a total of 60% of the indirect cost recovery, and the vice president for research kept 40%. Now we get 100%. That's the only incentive. There's some complexities that mean that it may not be an incentive. Ask me in a couple of years.
Bill, the tentative model, or the straw model, as you called it, that's currently under consideration, allocates a percentage of the state funding, goes to research, and the units will keep all of the indirect cost recovery, which is a change from what we've done in the past. That's, as has been mentioned multiple times, that's a pretty powerful incentive. In closing, I wanted you to know that I was I was the primary proponent to move in this direction, because as I got more experience in the provost office, I probably said 100 times there has got to be a better way to allocate resources. It also didn't take long to understand that the incremental model, when we talk about transparency, is that you really can't tell what's going on. I mean, we have a published budget. It's not that anything is hidden, but the way it's set up, you can't really tell how funds flow, and you can't tell what things really cost. And so one thing related to what the recent discussion, I think we've always known, I think everybody in the room that's thought about it has always known that less expensive programs subsidize more expensive programs. But we didn't really know what that was. We didn't know what a lot of things cost. We didn't know how those funds flowed. We know that now. And that's the first thing we ask Huron to help us with, is in that first consulting cycle, when they spent a lot of time and a lot of people worked on this, is just to better understand ourselves and how funds flow at Auburn University, so we can make rational decisions, thoughtful decisions about how we should move forward. And that's where we find ourselves right now. So we've got a straw model that's being discussed. It's going to be discussed with all the deans tomorrow afternoon. After that meeting, we'll be in a position to decide, are we going to go forward? Some have said, well, why go forward? Well, if we decided not to go forward, we still would have gained a lot from this because we learned so much more about ourselves. I think it would be unfortunate to think seriously about that next step where we could roll a model out for everybody to see. In my view, the reason we haven't done that earlier is we've been constantly working on this model, helping educate the deans and their finance officers and their department heads and chairs as to what this might really mean. And then taking all that feedback back and processing that with the help of the Huron Consulting Group in order to make the best possible decision. Like somebody said, we want to take advantage of all the things they've learned, and that's one of the reasons for this forum this afternoon. And so with that, in closing, we just want to do what's best for Auburn University, given all the changes that are taking place in recent years. And I think it's the right thing to do. Exactly how it should look, that's not for me to decide. A lot of smarter people will have to help us figure that out. But that's where we find ourselves right now. I'd really like to thank our panel. I think they've done a great job. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming and joining us this afternoon. And I wish all of you a safe journey home.